Well, great to see all of you this evening. And here we are, 2 weeks out, or 2 weeks tomorrow, from election 2022. So timely discussion and presentation this evening. We are going to break things up in two parts. To first focus on national and some state races and issues of discussion, and then also hear about the situation in San Francisco, be able to have a discussion and some Q&A on that. So we are really fortunate to have 4 wonderful panelists here with us this evening, and I am just going to go ahead and start the introductions and then hand it off so you can listen to them and not me. All right. So, Ben Tulchin has been a pollster on the national level for the last 2 decades. He has a long resume, which I can perhaps spend quite a long time going over, but he was a national pollster for candidate Bernie Sanders during both of his presidential races. He's run governorship races, ballot measures in states like California and throughout the country, congressional races. He can share a little bit more, but he's very active on numerous fronts. And in addition to being a hardcore politico, he's also a hardcore man. So I'm really happy to have him with us this Thank you, Ben. We are also blessed to have Christine with us. An author, attorney, and advocate, fierce advocate, and has a lifetime of grassroots organizing and public policy experience. A volunteer in politics since the stroller. She holds a PhD from University of Hastings, University of California Hastings, College of Law. BFFS, Foreign Service degree, I believe, from Georgetown University. She has served as a prosecutor here in San Francisco, special counsel in the Clinton Gore administration, chief of staff on Capitol Hill. She's an elected member on the executive committee for the California Democratic Party, the National Federation of Democratic Women, and the Democratic National Committee. She's also the author of Campaign Boot Camp 2.0, and the Amazon bestseller, The Nancy Pelosi Way. She's traveled throughout the country and around the globe conducting call to service training to thousands of leaders. A proud public school mom, Christine resides here in our wonderful San Francisco with her husband, Peter Kaufman, an Emmy-nominated filmmaker, and their daughter, Isabella. And I'm going to do a little plug. You can follow her on Twitter at SF. So we also have our beloved supervisor from District 7, Myrna Belgard. And Myrna, I'm going to introduce you more later, but just so I would share, when I told the rest of the panelists that you were joining, each and every one of them said, I love Myrna. All right, good. You can get rough here in San Francisco, right? And a much respected, hard-hitting journalist is with us, Joe Ashkenazi, who has served in worked for many different publications, and I'll say more about you when we get to the local part of the program. So without further ado.
Cameron here today. Anyway, it's great to be here tonight. I previously served on the board of Wallenberg. Previous iteration with Gia and others of you were on the board, so great to be back. I'm honored to be here with my fellow panelists. I know Christine is a stalwart of the party, and obviously Speaker Pelosi is, I think we saw in the video footage of January 6th hearing how fearless a leader she is, and it's really honored to share stage with her. And Supervisor, one of our other supervisors, a few things to talk to you about after. All right, I'm here to present kind of a big picture perspective. I didn't send you my updated biography. I'm actually the reigning pollster of the year for my work in electing mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, last year. So you're looking at the number one pollster in the country right now. Take away the crown yet. Okay, big picture. We're going to midterms. Historically, the last 90 years, there have only been 3 midterm elections where the party in power has not lost seats. 1934 FDR, 1998 with Clinton and the Republicans overreaching on impeachment, and 2002 with George W. Bush and the Iraq War, House Republicans favorability rates. Beyond that, typically the party in power loses seats. So the question is, can you defy history to be of this trends? And we have a very interesting election shaping up with competing forces: inflation, party power, inflation, rising costs of living for people, and then historic Supreme Court ruling overturning Roe v. Wade, and the kind of specter of Trump coming back into the political fold. So you have kind of competing interests here. Overall, this is kind of a standard question pollsters ask: right direction, wrong track. Voters, the red line is wrong track. Voters have been grumpy for a better part of a decade since the Great Recession. There's a little bit of hope when Obama got elected, but then it withered as recession lingered on for a better part of a decade. And now with rising prices and everything else, you have a very, very angry electorate. What this leads to is more desire for change and volatility in our electorate. If you look at the past decade, we've had the House change hands more often in a period of 10 years than we did since like the 1880s. So just a lot more volatility in our politics. That leads to challenges for incumbent President Joe Biden, whose job approval is now at 42% based on national polling averages, and tied too closely to voters' assessments on the right of economic issues, which the economy was just negative, minus 10, 43% approved, 15% disapproved. So that's driving things right now. So that, and again, this is a similar pattern that emerged with Obama, with Trump, and Clinton. I mean, just typically you get office on a high, your numbers drop, and it's the nature of the cycles of politics. So Trump, though, is still a factor in our politics and remains very, very popular. 44% have a very unfavorable opinion of him. And if you look at his shadow still looms large in politics, because this is the generic congressional vote. Kind of hard to read, but I'll walk you through it. A year ago, at the beginning of the year, I should say, Republicans were leading. The beginning of this year looked like a traditional midterm election where Democrats were struggling, Biden was struggling to pass legislation, meaningful legislation. Cost of gas and price inflation was rising, but then you had the Dobbs decision, Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, and you see the blue line later catching up the red line and then passing it, and a combination of Dobbs, we saw involved in a horrible massacre in Texas, and then January 6th hearings all summer reminded voters what they really didn't like about Trump. And we saw Democrats really surge and start defying a typical midterm. Now that momentum has faded a little bit, but the January 6th hearings were still kind of resurrected to some degree recently. But you see right now the generic vote is high, which projects to a 16-seat loss, which would put Republicans in the majority, Democrats in the minority. And part of it also is redistricting. I mean, right now, the odds makers give Republicans a 75 and 100 chance of winning the House. And redistricting, quite frankly, Republicans are better at gerrymandering than Democrats. I mean, I'll be blunt about it. I do some work in Ohio, and the Supreme Court there, Republicans were overthrew the Republicans on mass, so they went too far, and the state legislature ignored the Supreme Court and forced the state to vote on a map that would draw basically 13-2 advantage for Republicans when it's a 55-45 state. New Yorkers tried to do the same thing, through a gerrymandered map, and one Republican judge screwed the map out, and then New Yorkers were stuck with a much more balanced map, but that same judge didn't rule in Ohio, so you ended up one state where Democrats had a supermajority and couldn't draw the lines they wanted. Another state, Ohio, where Republicans have a supermajority and they could draw the lines exactly as they wanted. So that left Republicans with a slight advantage. Not to mention the normal midterm cycle. So that's where the House is. The Senate, I'm sure many of you follow these races very carefully. It's 50-50 now, and it's looking to be very, 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 very close. In fact, there's a good chance that, remember what happened in 2020 where there was a runoff in Georgia with two races, both of them Democrats did.
something could happen now, where Democrats losing in Nevada, they lose Nevada but win Pennsylvania, or Ohio, or North Carolina, or Wisconsin, one other pickup, then it all comes down to Georgia again, and there is a libertarian on the ballot in Georgia, so there's likely to be a runoff in December. So I don't know what all you're doing in December, but if there is a runoff, I hope all of you volunteer to go to Georgia to do some door knocking. So it's not that old, it sounds like there, but so that's what the Senate looks like. And the odds makers give it 56 and 100% chance, 56 and 100 odds of Democrats retaining control in the Senate. That is down from about 75 and 100 about a month ago, so we've seen momentum shift a little bit away as the momentum from the summer that I talked about has faded a little bit. But as I was talking to Christine before, she still feels energetic and optimistic, but because she's involved in a lot of pro-choice advocacy work around the country and sees the energy out there. So that's really kind of the dual force we have. Is there enough energy behind Roe v. Wade getting overturned, or is inflation, gas prices making voters frustrated and angry enough to vote Democrats out of college? So we kind of have two competing themes here in this election. Statewide, not as much dynamic, although the bunch of competitive congressionals, Gavin looks to be pretty much set for re-election. Ballot measures, you've probably seen a lot of ads about ballot measures. I'm happy to talk in more detail about them after, but just top one, of course, is a constitutional amendment to protect a woman's right to choose. That's winning overwhelmingly. Prop 30, very interesting debate on Prop 30, and we have a split house among the Democratic Party. We have the party and conservationists, environmentalists in favor of Prop 30, which is raise tax on the wealthy to basically provide subsidies for electric cars. And some model fire prevention. The governor and the teachers union are against it because they don't want kind of niche funding source for a popular tax. So you have mail pieces I have about that, and some teachers union opposing it. So you have kind of a divide between the Democratic Party. And then the sports betting ballot measures. I've done a lot of work on this. Full disclosure, I work for San Manuel Tribe on the No on 27 side. I can tell you a lot about 26, 27, but they're both losing, and they're probably going to lose at this point. So if you want to gamble on sports after November, you probably have to still go to Vegas to do it. But that issue's coming back, I guarantee that one. Congressional races, there are a bunch. Christine's mother was very involved here in raising a lot of money. This is Christine. There are a lot of competitive congressional races up and down the state after redistricting. So I'm sure many folks use names and recognize them, but and so that's why Prop 1, helping boost turnout with voters, is important. And so there's a lot of states in California, turnout will matter, not just statewide, but these swings. So if you want to get involved in a local congressional race, there are many to choose from, including a couple not too far driving distance away. So that's my presentation. Christine.
Excellent job, Ben. Well, thank you, Gia. Thank you, Wallenberg, for having me. And it's great to be back at the JCC. I spent a lot of time here in the Hall of Moms. I'll just say my secret to success was rosemary and chocolate chip pod. FYI, in case you want to know what the kids like. And my daughter Bella went here, and I noticed we passed Maury Kemmer. We didn't agree on anything in politics, but he's a lovely, generous man, and he danced at our wedding, and was just a terrific friend of the family, and so it's always great to be back at the JCC. Obviously, our roots to Wallenberg go way back, because my grandfather was a member of Congress from Baltimore, and even before he was a New Deal Democrat, he loved FDR. He named one of his children FDR, Dallas Senator. However, he was also a member of the Berkson Group, and he took great issue with his president on the issue of Palestine and the need to create a Jewish state, and also on the issue of refugees. And when I went to Georgetown, one of my professors was Jan Karski, who, as you know, is Staff Hill. They're in a connection to Wallenberg. And it's really interesting with Jan Karski, and I bring him up because I think it's a direct line to what's happening today. He taught this class called Theory of Communism, and it was always one day he's going to tell a story, but you never knew what day it was going to be, so you had to go and tell it. But one day was he never introduced it, it wasn't on the syllabus, but there will be this one day that he was telling the story. Now, he's in the late 80s, so this is the height of the Cold War. Georgetown University Foreign Service School, where we had all these professors, including people who come from then Soviet Union, who come out of both wars, in fact, in some cases, World War I, World War II. And it was amazing. One of the things that Karski told us in class was the story that he went to the authorities and he told them what was happening, and they said, I don't think you're a liar, but I don't believe you. And it's amazing because I was kind of referencing that when the former situation was talking to himself as God-given and God-chosen, and people believe that about him, even after his insurrection, even after the impeachments, even after everything. So when you look at what's on the ballot, I mean, I think you can draw a line, at least for me, from the type of education you try to, give your kids at the JCC, the kind of, the kind of faith-based communities that people build, and in San Francisco, it's interfaith. My kids are Catholics, they're Catholic in their church. Nothing like a little interfaith conversation. As Sammy Lauder knows, I went to Catholic school. I went to more sages than my Jewish husband. So you never know, right, how it's all going with the flow. But the fact of the matter is, you can draw a line from the same kind of denialism that was happening during World War II to the anti-Semitism that was expressed by a president who had a Jewish daughter and son-in-law, to Adidas just refusing to drop Kanye West still over his anti-Semitism because they want to cash in on him. And it's on his music, and they think we're just going to give the anti-Semitism a pass. So it's really scary when you think of the rise of hate. And I remember here thinking, like, I had to do Trump checks, we had, all of the things that went on here for a long time. I thought, God, with all the innovation in San Francisco, why is it the JCC has such, crappy Wi-Fi in there? Those are jammers. That's the reason why we can't get a good signal here. So I look at the election and I think absolutely democracy is on the line. As it happens, my mom's in Croatia tonight on a meeting about Ukraine and about trying to get Russia out of Crimea, because Crimea is Ukraine. Has to be successful in its fight against Putin. It just has to be. We can't have him destroying democracy in Ukraine or here in the U.S. And I think it's really important that we understand the divisions that are at work, not only between communities and between ideologies, but also how anti-Semitism has a role to play in that, and that's why we have to fight anti-Semitism constantly, not just because it's hate, and not just because it's a scourge, but also because of the impact it has on our politics. And so when a former president of the United States tells American Jews, you better know what's good for you, and when the fact of the matter is he could win again next week in Israel, and we're back to the same arguments that we've been having. It's just how do we have some fresh leadership? And with the voters in a mood, and Ben talked about it, they're in a mood. And he knows, he looks at the polls. I look at all the ads, and all the people that are like, hey, why are you Nancy Pelosi? Go to San Francisco, but we're here in fill in the blank. Texas, Arizona, Alaska, the Democratic members of Congress or candidates are certainly being tied to being San Francisco Democrats, which is bad. But I think it's also important to remember that the same power and control over ideology is the power and control over LGBTQ rights, over women's rights, and over civil rights. It's all of the same piece, which is the desire to have uniformity. And for people who are going through very, very turbulent times, and I wrote about this in my books, very, very turbulent times, and we've been doing this since 2005 when I hit the road working with AFSCME, trying to elect union-friendly working-class candidates to Congress. The fact of the matter is, you have these waves, and it's almost like it's a national wave, but it's a lot of little local things, right? It's a lot of little local patterns that are going on. People are very, very frustrated about trade. They're very, very frustrated about the lack of careers for their children. They're concerned about housing. And while there's a lot that we've done to come out of COVID, we're still very much in it, which is why we're masked or vaccinated or both. and of course for people with disabilities, there is no getting out of COVID. So I think those are some of the things that we're looking at. And if I were to summarize it, I would say that Trump's deadly denials and delays put us into our share of the depression. But it is also true that Democrats did what it took to keep people alive, and now they're alive. They're not about the lost. They're mad about the learning loss of their kids. They're mad about the future that they don't have. They're mad about having tapped into those nest eggs, and they're looking for someone to blame. The one question I have for Ben before we get to yours is this. I've always thought that there's two measures you look at. We're the right track, wrong track, and does this person care about the problems of people like me? And you can win if you get one of those answers right, but you can't win if you get both of them wrong, right? So right now, with Biden, we're on the wrong track, but I still think they think that he cares about their problems. The question is whether or not they're going to give them a congressional majority to try harder, or whether they're waiting.
It's a good question. I mean, this was some really insightful perspective. I think for Biden's in a tough spot because he wanted to nominate him. I worked against him for Bernie in the primary, and he won not because of inspiring a broad coalition. He was the pragmatic choice. He was the more moderate choice, and that's how he's governed. He's kind of a moderate, on a mature, adults in the room, bring back normalcy. But when you talk to people who are angry, that's like a kid who's got a tantrum. Like you can't ration with them, right? And Biden's trying to reason with them. And I think one thing Biden hasn't done a great job with since the beginning is understand that when voters are angry, like a kid's having a tantrum, you need to redirect that anger. And you need to find a bad guy, a villain. And the January 6th hearings did a great job. Just what you just laid out there seems amazing. And that's what January 6th hearings did. For 3 months, we had people focusing on how bad Trump is, but then we kind of lose sight of it. And Biden, look, I respect him, but he's sometimes too respectful to the process. He's sometimes like, I want to respect this, but we're in, a very polarized moment, right? So to get voters to give, I think he's got to grab their attention by saying, look, I think you laid it out as well as Biden ever has, which is, here's the stark divide facing us, good versus evil. I'm on the good side, they're on the evil side, make a choice. I feel like he hasn't made that, case to voters for them to realize, oh my gosh, things are bad, but it could be worse. So I feel like I don't think he's summed it up as neatly as you did, quite frankly.
Well, we'll tell him that. I would also say, you can tell him that. I would also say he is getting to, Biden is going to get, he'll get to the vote, so let me just recite them. After the extreme Supreme Court repealed Roe, 209 House Republicans said no to Roe, 205 said no to freedom to travel for an abortion, 195 said no to birth control. Yeah. I wonder what's happening with those 195 homes, but that's another story. 157 said no to same-sex and interracial marriage. So if we want to say we're not going back, and he's not comfortable, other than Trump saying there's an enemy, at least you can say this is their vote, believe them, because this is how they voted. So I feel like what I see in my pro-choice work around the country and working with 36 different women's caucuses, and Penny and Alice are members of California, mentioned that, plus 36 more. The fact of the matter is that my daughter's part of the justice generation, right? Teenagers, Mary, yours too, right? They talk about ending period poverty at school. They're debating abortion in class. Like, we never did that. Well, certainly not in common sacred heart. But that was like not a thing, right? But justice is something that we do together. And this generation in particular, they're just out there. And they're just going to talk about it, and good for them. They are just themselves, and they're very open. And by the way, pro-choice and anti-choice about what they think. But there's also a privacy generation. And the privacy generation is something you do by yourself. We all still know people who are closeted LGBTQ. We do. We all know people who have a story, right? And they'll say, you in Hushdom, I have a story. Again, question for Ben, but this is anecdotal, I don't know what the data is. When we call households that have different last names, like we're Pelosi and Kaufman, we're not a hyphen, it tends to be much more progressive. But if we were Kaufman and Kaufman, it would be much more socially conservative. Or I need here in the year of our Lord 2022, I need to talk to my husband first. I heard that last week. So, I don't know what you're going to talk to him about, but say, I still think that if you go to those privacy voters and you say, what is a judge doing at our kitchen table or in our hospital room? And you make it about privacy, you have a bigger chance, but that's not gonna show up in a poll. So I wonder, is there a difference that you see between, the same last name couples and different last name couples on these issues?
Yeah, for sure, no, it's a good observation. I think, yes, there's a big cultural divide. The other challenge we have is there are fewer of them in swing states, like Pennsylvania, Georgia, southern state with more traditional voters, right? So there's fewer of those split last name divide. But what I've seen though is the, I mean, I've done focus groups in swing states this cycle, post-Dobbs, and the anger that even Republican women have about that they're taking away this right, and that no exception for rape and incest is infuriating to many voters, including Republican women. And that's what we're kind of, the challenge we have is to kind of remind them of that constantly, versus the other challenge we're facing is they drive by the gas station every day and see gas prices at the highest rates they've ever experienced. So like, it's kind of a day-to-day stress versus kind of a immediate, kind of a threat to their rights, which for some people is an everyday thing, but other families, it's kind of not an everyday visceral reality. And look, I've seen the reality. I mean, this great quote I heard from a voter a swing voter in Southern California, an independent woman. She said, gas prices go up and down, but you take away my rights, it's a permanent loss of rights. And so that's kind of the momentum we have to kind of tap into, is that sense of this is permanent.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I'm going to ask you to be the moderator next time, because you've had some great questions for Ben. So I know that not everyone can stay with us the whole time. So I do want to point out for questions from the audience, just quickly, there's going to be 2 people handing out index cards. Please raise your hands, Jeremy and Wendy. So if you have a question, please just put it down, and we're going to try to get to as many and kind of group them together, because often there's similar ones, and while that's taking place, we can too. I will ask the following. So both of you are very involved in strategy to get folks elected, and you advise your clients based on any number of factors in a given race. And I know Christine, in addition to training candidates, you're very active in both California and the National Democratic Party. What can both of you share on sort of what the thinking was and how to be successful this year, both, and to the extent that you know, sort of on one side and the other, kind of what you think needs to happen for different races to be successful. And here we are in November or whatever. 23.
Well, I would say this, January 6th really changed a lot. I mean, I think everything Ben said about history, obviously was true, we lived it, we dealt with it, we were looking at Capitol Hill during 2002, even Democrats before that, and, many were for the Iraq War, and I remember when we were organizing against it, because my boss and my mom, different members of Congress, both were against it. I remember they said, the war in Iraq is going to determine the Democratic leaders. And it did, because the Democratic leader at the time, the whip, now remember that the leader is Gephardt, he's for the war. The whip is supposed to be organizing votes, and Nancy Pelosi, she's against the war. So, and ultimately, that her view prevailed. That view prevailed. But it was tough on the party. You can't win if you're not united on an issue. This time, we had 2 things that happened. One in January 6th, which was shocking to people, and it recruited a whole bunch of great candidates. They self-recruited. They were an amazing group of people. I think it also gave a boost to the people who had national security background but were running in tough districts, because they could say, but this is just completely extreme. But it didn't go on to recruiting. By the time jobs came along, we already had these candidates, they were already running, and I would say moderates had won most of the primaries in the swing districts. And in a couple cases where they didn't, such as the district currently, but soon not to be occupied by Kurt Schrader, it was not, it was the party welcomed the nominee with a great embrace. So I think we were ready, and then when jobs came, it was like, okay, now you're gonna go, now we're gonna hit pedal to the metal. But I think you have to link them together, because they are linked together. You can't separate the kitchen table from the, from the doctor's office. You know, it's all happening, it's all happening around people's personal economy. And so when you talk about choosing the size and timing of our family, and that is an economic issue, most people understand that. But I think that's as far as you can go to get those privacy voters. When you start getting into the economic costs of being forced to have a child and all that, I think you can turn off. That's a justice voters argument. That to me turns off the privacy voters, and I think you need the privacy voters to win. So that's my thinking. But what do you?
Well, I think elections are about a choice, right? And now, given how grumpy voters are, it's the lesser of two evils. But so then you have to present the other side in a way that shows that they're on the wrong side of the issues. Whether in economics, we haven't engaged on economics well this cycle, but the choice issue where we win. But the question is, can we compete in economics? And this is where I feel our party's not done a great job to kind of articulate a clear economic message. But in a contrast to say, so we're having a debate about gas prices. We're pulling parties in the pocket of oil companies. 99% of political contributions from oil companies go to Republicans. So who are you going to trust to address gas prices? And so we've just been silent on that for too long. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act, had a very important legislation to address the cost of prescription drugs, to be able to negotiate the cost of prescription drugs. We've not advocated that effectively. And again, big pharma typically is on the side of Republicans. So that is where, even when we're in the privacy argument, the choice argument, and economics, I think we fail because we have provide a contrast. And I think you get run a defensive on, but we still have an argument to make, and we haven't made that argument. So that's where I feel like frustrated at a party where we haven't been able to articulate that clearly, because we've been scared. Like, oh my God, they're going to beat us up on it. Like, well, you got to fight. You can't just not go in the ring because we're fighting economic argument. But we're starting to see more of them the next 2 weeks, and we'll see this and that.
I would note that Bernie Sanders and Nancy Pelosi both mentioned the economy yesterday on the national show.
They're very good at it. That was one thing I have to say, like, coming out of Bernie's campaign, like, people think a lot of mainstream media and mainstream Democratic Party is Bernie's just lefty, right? And it's like, yes, he is, but he was effective because he had focused on an economic message, a progressive populist economic message, which you look at our TV ads, which I helped write extensively in 2016-2020, 99% of them were on economic issues, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the economy, whatever it was, and he's very disciplined when it comes to the economy. Sometimes he gets off track, but for the most part, he's very, very disciplined on economic issues, and that's what his success is. And your mom has been incredibly successful because she has foresight and great political instincts on the war. I worked for Howard D, so we saw all that. She took out Cap-Hart, right? And she's always had a very good sense of economics. The speaker, she doesn't have the full pulpit that the president does, provide that message.
So,
Our beloved Myrna.
okay. All right, there are a lot of questions here. We're probably going to end up merging some of them because I know Christine says you're not part speakers. But there's a question about how concern of Kanye West's that type of rhetoric and how it's being responded to and the way that does and doesn't influence elections. Meaning alertness to the concern, and is that because they're an outlier, or do we see that actually motivating, or on the other side, motivating people who are sympathetic to the view or outraging the vote? Is that a role at all?
I'm not seeing it and play out in individual campaigns, but to touch on what Christine talked about, what we're very worried about is January 6th being kind of the beginning of the rise of fascism in the United States, to be blunt, and allowing these dark forces, unleashing them. And that's what scares me, that if you kind of make it okay to say things like that, then it becomes more widespread. And that I don't think it's going to necessarily impact the midterm elections in 2022, but for the sake of our country and our democracy, I see that we're going down a very slippery slope.
I would say that, if there's a guy with a Camp Auschwitz t-shirt, who was in my mother's office on January 6th, right? I mean, like, that is scary. You have here's what I see. When you talk about the undercurrents, it always turns up this time, you have the voter depression, right? So look at what's happening in Georgia, and I do think it's there. It's mostly against Stacey Abrams because you've got Walker and Warnock, who are both black men. You saw how there were certain folks who were like, certain black men who said, Stacey Abrams hasn't done anything for black men, so she says, well, I'm going to do all these things, and they say, now you're pandering to us. So there's a whole, there is a movement, an undercurrent in the conversation that says, you're doing all this work for Ukraine, why aren't you doing anything for Mississippi? Well, Brett Favre took care of that. Then we're going to kind of stop saying it in Mississippi, because we're like, no. And the governor, Tate Reeves, who, he took care of the water everywhere else but in Jackson, and then there's a generator outside his place in Jackson, right? So it's not working in Mississippi, but they're still on it in Georgia. So I see that undercurrent a lot. They'll say, why are you investing in Ukraine, not the U.S.? And we say, we are investing in the U.S. But to the economic message point, it's easier to think that we're all getting screwed over than it is to think, hey, we just got something fixed. Even with our economic message at this point, it's easier to say, we lowered the prescription drug prices, they want to raise them again. Who do you want to be for, right? We're protecting Social Security, they want to cut it. We're protecting disability insurance, they want to cut it. We're protecting Medicare, they want to cut it. You have to get to those points. And so the anti-Semitism plays a part in that. When above the 405 freeway, they had a sign that says Conway was right about the Jews. What? You know what it is. You're going all the way back. You're going all the way back to wounds that we thought had healed between the communities, which need to now be stitched again. So I absolutely think that it's nefarious, but I also think people are using it to try to have push points. And again, I'd say look at Georgia, look at Arizona, where Blake Masters will not condemn anti-Semitic people who support him. So I do think that where there's a real close race, you're going to see that, and I think that's why it's really important. Because it's the right thing to do, we should condemn it. But it's also important because, politically speaking, you cannot say that power is worth coming in on the back of hate. I don't think that we can accept that.
So I'm going to invite Joe and Mira to come on up, yes, and join us. And I know Ben can say, I'm not sure if your time is. Okay. All right. Okay, great. And I should have said at the beginning, because we have, we're going to acknowledge our various co-sponsors in more detail. But this event is intended, even though the Democratic Club is clearly affiliated. Accordingly, this is intended to be an educational event and nonpartisan, and any statements that come from our panelists are theirs and reflect their views and thoughts. Just wanted to put that out there.
Illegal.
Okay. So, Myrna was first elected to District 7 here in San Francisco just about 2 years ago during the pandemic. Very successful Zoom campaign as well as knocking on doors, I'm sure. But she has served the city for decades in a wide variety of capacities. She is the chair currently of the Board Land Use and Transportation Committee. She's a member of the Public Safety and Neighborhood Services Committee, Commissioner on Bay Area Air Quality Management Agency, and San Francisco First 5. She represents San Francisco's West Side, West Portal, and I could name all the neighborhoods, but I'll just shout out any fellow Brandeis parents. She represents that whole part of the city. beautifully, and she's a past president of the City Planning Commission. I could go on and on, but really just, I want to say that that you are a genuine person. You have never forgot your family story, who immigrated here in the 80s from El Salvador as refugees during the country's civil war. She takes civil rights and social justice issues. Well, it's runs in your blood, and I think we all know that and see that. And she is proud to call herself Jewish Latina or Latino Jew, depending on, you know, I don't know. Jutina. There we go. All right, wonderful. And Joe Ashkenazi is currently the managing editor and columnist with Mission Local. Born in San Francisco, raised in the Bay Area, attended UC Berkeley, and has never left. He is a writer and he has been a writer and columnist for many different publications, local publications, SF Weekly, senior editor of San Francisco Magazine. He's contributed work to Public Press, San Francisco Chronicle, Examiner, Dallas Morning News, and spent many years as a reporter at the J Weekly as well. He is raising 3 kids in this fair city with his wife, living in the Excelsior, and is basically the real deal. So thank you for being here. And I'm now going to invite you to share
Thank you. So I'm so excited to be here sharing this moment with Joe, who is, I think, the city's best investigative journalist, who finds stuff out that no one else does, so I'm really excited. So I think that, you know, San Francisco, we're seeing a little microcosm of what's happening in the national level, though our own flavor. I think voters are angry. In this past year, have sort of thrown all the rules that we thought we knew about San Francisco politics out the window. And so what is going to happen in November, you know, it's just a toss-up, except for maybe Ben, who looks at the polls. But, you know, I think that, you know, I will talk about the propositions, and maybe Joe can talk a little bit about the races. You know, the propositions really, as somebody who chairs the Land Use and Transportation Committee, the things that are most contentious on the ballot right now have to do with land use. How we use land for housing and how we use land for transportation and to get around. And so the 2 big contentious propositions are, of course, J and I. J is closing the JFK Drive off to car traffic and making it for pedestrians and bicyclists permanently. And it has its counter in Proposition I that seeks to open it back up to cars, and not just JFK, but the Great Highway. And not just the Great Highway that's currently closed on weekends, but everything going down to Skyline, which we have spent the last, you know, couple decades trying to deal with because it's sliding into the ocean. And so those are the 2 very contentious issues on the ballot that are each other's mirror. And then we have Proposition B and Proposition E, which is the same thing with housing. And it has to do with whether or not we keep our current system of a very long, involved process to entitle residential housing being built. The Proposition D being put on the ballot by the mayor and spur and a bunch of folks who call themselves pro-housing, who want to see less process and faster building and more housing. And then Proposition E, which is sponsored by a group of my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors. The lead author is Supervisor Connie Chan, and the building trades, who say, well, we can't, you know, we need more housing in exchange for giving up the process. And by the way, what we do with this process is get good community benefits, including project labor agreements for the unions. And so those are the 2 mirror images of each other, and they each have a poison pill that if one passes, the other one does not pass. And so that's important to know. And then the rest, the things that are on the ballot have to do with government efficiency, with Proposition C, giving an oversight committee to the Department of Homelessness, which is, you know, very important to San Francisco right now. Proposition A, that deals with retirement benefits, that puts back a cost of living allowance to retirees who make $50,000 or less a year. So these are folks who work for the city and did not make much money. They're still not making much money with inflation. Things are hard. And then there's a bunch of propositions that have to do with taxes and money. So we have, I'm sorry, I have my little cheat sheet. Library, a library bond that does not raise your taxes, but it goes to support our libraries. The Student Success Fund, Proposition G, that shifts money from the general fund to our public schools to support students and all of the tutoring, all the pandemic recovery activities that, we need to, for student success. Changing the elections to get rid of odd-year elections to make them even only, which, drives turnout. And then we have a transportation tax that will renew the sales tax that we currently pay, that will go for roads, pedestrian improvements, and all of that stuff. And then we have a vacant homes tax that will tax folks who keep their rental apartments empty for a period of time. And then also the city college tax, which actually is a tax. It'll raise, it's a parcel tax. It's progressive in that properties that are, valued higher will pay more than properties that are valued less, but it's nevertheless a new parcel tax. And then lastly, Proposition N, which is attached to Proposition J, and that it reconfigures the way we pay for that parking lot at the Golden Gate, at the Golden Gate Park underneath the Visa Concourse. So that's an overview. I'd be happy to eke out of the details. So what we're seeing really in all of this is, I think, a generational shift in how we treat housing, how we view housing, and the process that we are used to in San Francisco, a very long and involved process, and a new generation of folks and activists who want to see more housing, less process, and have, just like a more sustainable way, in a more affordable way to do it. And then also, we're seeing the same in transportation. Folks who say we're too dependent on cars, we have a climate crisis, we have to have new ways to get around so that we are, living a little bit less off of, the earth. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Joe and he can talk about the folks.
Thank you, Mary. To echo Penn, to echo Christine, I think there's a lot of in-show and anger. I feel like the going by in San Francisco is kind of like Howard Beale shouting, "I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore," out the window. And you can be mad as hell and not take it anymore, but that doesn't necessarily mean I have policies and this is going to be a good decision I'm going to make. So I've talked about this, I've written about this. I feel that San Franciscans of a certain wealth and class needed the government to work for them, and it did. And normal people who are more easily ignored during are used to the government not doing coming through for them. People who are fairly well off, are established. When the government works for their government, is usually a bit more immaterial. They're doing fine. During the pandemic, that didn't happen. Quite simply, if you have a child at home, you are not working. You're not able to earn money. And that's what it was, disproportionately on working women. And it was a big problem. And I think that among other things, I think, fueled the outrageously heavy margins in the Board of Education. That wasn't the case. And while I think that there are national trends to look at, who's donating to what, I think that was easily explained by the mission. So let's get to what's going on in this election. And if I can just be Dr. Tur, which is my job, we are going to vote on some propositions D and E. We have convoluted workarounds that are very hard to parse the difference of them. That a couple of words here or there mean a great deal, but nobody's putting any effort to fixing actual organizations that are tasked with constructing housing and putting people into them. So that's not what about it, but that is something to think about. It. Put a bigger engine in the car, but it's got no wheels, you're not going anywhere. So that's something to think about. We're going to see how this anger hits the fortifications of San Francisco politics. It's very difficult to see how it's going to work. So when we look at candidates, we have candidates in District 6 trying to out-public safety each other. It's going to be an interesting thing to see. Each of them is talking about how they want to do more for public safety. Say that Honey Mahogany has one of the best slogans ever, would say Streets Honey. And we're going to have to see how that works. We're going to see the power of incumbency in these elections. We have two of our appointed incumbent Board of Education members here. If I was Ben or if I had Poland, I would think they have a great chance here, but you know, it's going to be interesting to see how the power of incumbency works on these bodies. I don't think the enforcement is going to matter quite so much. I think people are going to look at other factors. Going back and shifting here, we have, let's say, District 4. It's going to be interesting to see how the power of incumbency and demographics works in the race between Gordon Park and Joel Marty. There were 3 candidates in that race, or not. Moving on to District 8, Raoul Wallenberg was here earlier. Looks like he'll do all right. District 10, just about the same. And we have the district attorney's election. 2 of the 3 candidates are here. This is going to be a very interesting race. I can't wait for the hot takes from the national press of what it's all going to mean. San Franciscans are being asked to process a lot. There are a lot of tremendous baggage issues with the candidates. And there are also a lot of debating ideologies. And it's a lot to take, especially on a ballot that is getting close to the second half of the alphabet. And also, I will not forget, because we have a public defender's race as well. Rebecca Young is here. I know I'm not sure this time. So again, I see a lot of anger and frustration, but I do not know how it's going to play out. That is going to be very difficult to say. And oftentimes, we attach a bit too much to ideology in San Francisco. Sometimes the best candidate just wins.
Yeah, I was just saying, you know, the interesting thing for folks who have been following politics, like you have, you know, for decades, is the power of incumbency is actually really strong, right? And, you know, the last time an elected incumbent supervisor lost a race was when we moved from large elections to district elections a long time ago, 20 years ago. And that's because, you know, it was, you know, Maple Grove who lost, who was basically actually and running in District 7. It didn't quite work. But no elected supervisor has lost upon, you know, re-election. But this is a weird year. This is an unusual year. It's a year of anger. So I wonder how that's going to work out. So being a West Side supervisor, I know that folks on the West Side are very worried about crime, property crime. There's a lot of anger. So I do wonder how that's going to play out. If you had asked me a year ago whether or not the recalls were going to be successful, I would have been like, well, this never happened before. That's the number 1 rule of politics, right? It hasn't happened before. And it has not, but now in San Francisco, we have 3. So that's, you know, that is significant, and people are angry. And I think that will play out in the election.
Yeah, I think you can only recall so often before people get tired of this. It becomes an old trick. And in the case of there are a lot of factors. People aren't just angry, people are thinking about a lot of things. I think the District 4 race is going to be a very interesting demographic test. It's very difficult to win the District 4 race not being an Asian American. I'm not sure it's ever happened. And so, you know, John Shanley told me that when he ran against Steve Lee, it was already considered to be, you know, a fool's errand to run against an Asian American, and that was a long time ago. So, you know, had Leanna Louie been in the race to South Asian American votes, that would have been a thing, but now it's not. So, you know, there's not just anger, there's also demographics, and there's also who shows up. I think it's going to be a very heavy turnout. That's where it's always been. I'm just surprised it's not 70%. So we'll get to that. People are going to be reading the tea leaves. You know, what does it all say? What does it all say about the strength of the incumbent mayor in the next election if her appointees don't do well? It's tempting. I don't know that people's thought process when they send their ballots goes through all of that. It's hard to say. And we also don't know when we'll be voting on the next one. So, you know, if I were the mayor, I would not necessarily want to be sitting on the dump tank chair for any longer than I have to. I would not want to have to deal with all of the union contracts that I've done in 2024 and then having to run for office, which wouldn't be your situation. If you were elected in 2023, then you know you could say, oh, your demands are bad. In 2024, what they can do about it is somebody else. So it's going to be an interesting next couple of months and years. And certainly, the heavens may fall in regards to the national elections, but local elections still have to go on. And I remember in 2016, my colleagues at San Francisco Magazine said, well, what does it matter that we have local elections? What just happened? It matters now more than ever, because the people who don't want to be paying attention are going to try and get away with that much more. And I've always said this, people show up to vote in the national elections, which are consequential, and that's great. But San Francisco is not going to decide the next president. But you and a small company can make a very big difference in a multi-billion-dollar bond. You can save or eviscerate public transit. You can elect people to office or not elected to office that will be very consequential for generations. So local issues do matter and always matter.
So we are running behind, but I want to try to get just a couple questions, and then we have a number of elected officials who are, I think, waiting to come in, and others who will soon be arriving. But your last comment, I think, is a good segue to a question that I have about what, in addition to doing things like joining the Raoul Wallenberg Jewish Democratic Club, what can people do locally, from your perspectives, to really kind of understand things that, maybe they're not following inside baseball, because the two of you are, but to be educated and then to make a difference, in addition to voting? Are there things that you would call out?
Yeah, I will make a plug for watching decision-making processes, because a lot of people don't. I think, I sit at these board meetings and committee meetings, and I will admit that sometimes watching SFUSC meetings, because I'm a geek, but there's a lot of dialogue that takes place, and a lot of working out the issues that I think is important for the public to understand. When you read just somebody's synopsis on the ballot, they're trying to convince you of their point of view, and sometimes it's difficult to sort of see all of the thinking that went behind it. So I would encourage folks to just watch your decision makers and hear how they're thinking through stuff, and hear what the public has to say back to them too. Because I learn a lot from public comments. People have all kinds of opinions, but they also bring their perspective and new knowledge to the conversation. I think that's really important.
Piggyback off your point.
And read Joe.
Well, I don't necessarily mean, but to piggyback off your point, candidates and people pushing an issue, it's kind of like when you go to the supermarket and they're selling ice cream. It's always, you look at the little window on the Rocky Road, all the good stuff there, and then you realize they put all the good stuff by the window. That's how it works, right? You need to get a little deeper. Mary can disagree with me on this one, but public comment is important, but I've always felt that anybody who had an interest in a subject matter has waited too late if you waited till public comment. You do not make an inspirational speech when there's 2 minutes left in the game and you're down by 3 touchdowns. You make that speech at halftime or earlier, or better yet, you train. So you get involved on the ground floor. Do not wait till public comment. That is a soccer game. Yes, you should check out Mission Local. It's not necessarily me. I'm going to say that you should check out the graphic on funding that was made by our fantastic data reporter, Will Jarrett. He's British. I can say he's bloody brilliant. And he made a spider chart that does not look insane. Because it's not just, this guy had this guy's lawyer, and this guy's lawyer has a P.O. box here, and it all goes back to the Rothschilds and the Bilderberg people, which, the main guardian who actually had a spider chart that said PG&E Spain, which is true. In this case, you can actually move them around and see who is interrelated, who is donating to various things. It's very useful, and it has up-to-date numbers, and he's created an algorithm that he can update it every week. So it's very useful to see who is funding who. Very useful, I would say, go to that. And, we have it as a graphic, and just explore $10 million so far, and check out that. That's, I think, money talks. Endorsements are great, but money talks. People don't fund people just for fun. So that's what I would say to do.
Well, I think that is a good place to pause or end this section. I believe all 3 of our remaining panelists are going to be here to mix and mingle with all of you. And we already have some of our city's leadership. I see our new DA here, and I think other folks that are coming in. So we acknowledge all of you, but we're giving everyone a few minutes to get some food and drink. There is a lot of wine. It's like a what I thought. and lunches. So if you need the restroom during maybe like, we're gonna take 5-10 minutes, then we're gonna start. The mayor's on the way, and we're gonna have some remarks, Senator Wiener as well. But there are restrooms down to the right, and for now, I will thank everyone for participating in this, and we have a little bit more to come, so please mix and mingle.
And don't forget to vote.
Yes.
Any politician probably can. First by saying that I appreciate this club and your continuous support and advocacy in San Francisco, specifically your work around the Democratic Party. In times such as these, we need leaders and we need people who are involved in the party to be actively engaged, not just here in San Francisco, but all over the country. So it is meaningful, and it's great to be here with people who I truly appreciate the opportunity to work with, including Supervisor Melgar and our City Attorney David Chu, as well as our great State Senator Scott Wiener. And I want to acknowledge someone who I just recently had an opportunity to appoint to the Community College Board, Raoul Green, in the back, Dr. Raoul Green. And I know that you all are going to be making a decision fairly soon. I'm certain you probably read the ballot from front to bottom, like most Democrats who really are actively engaged do. And I just want you to all know, we know we've had some challenges in San Francisco in the past, and we will continue, of course, to have various challenges in the future. But I think what is most important is not that we have people who are in office who are anti-mayor or anti-anything else, but that we have people who are willing to roll up their sleeves and get the job done and to do what is in the best interest of San Francisco. And I feel as though, San Franciscans, basically made a statement when they made some decisions around some of the recent recalls. And what I try to do in the decisions that I make is really meet with the kinds of people that so many folks from all walks of life were telling me they wanted to see serve, people who wanted to do the job. In fact, for the district attorney, someone who was an actual prosecutor, as well as folks like Raoul, who were actively engaged in the city college system, born and raised in San Francisco, and really focus on education and our students. So making these decisions, of course, are hard, but they're part of my responsibility, and I took that responsibility very seriously. So I want you all to know what's really important to me on this during this race. Of course, is going to be are you on the race? Are you on the ballot, David?
Thankfully not.
Okay. Nowadays, it's like, do I know you were on the last ballot? That's right. But the district attorney has hit the ground running and been doing an extraordinary job, and I hope you all will get to know her and really support her. And Brooke Jenkins, I know she was here earlier and had to leave. Also, I'm strongly supporting the members of the school board that I appointed, and I haven't seen any of them, but we'll provide you with a list of names as well as Raoul.
They were here earlier.
Here from the Community College Board. For the propositions, I just want to bring to your attention Prop D. Thank you for being here for Prop D. I know this is a bit of a battle, but ultimately, it's time to stop playing around with getting housing built in San Francisco and actually get housing built in San Francisco. So that, along with a couple of other things that we're trying to do to get that done. And I don't want to start any fights about J or I. I do support J, but I is bad for San Francisco, and we are concerned about the amount of money that we're going to have to spend if I passes. It's really, not a well thought out measure, and in fact, some of the original supporters have backed down because of what they would expect us to do, which would counter the climate agreement that we are working on or implemented for the Ocean Beach area. So regardless of where you stand on JFK and the closure, please vote no on I. And also, I wanted to also bring up L, which is a really important transportation measure. And so I know there's some people who are strongly, I see Janice from the BART board screaming for it because we need our transportation resources. And last but not least, I want to ask people to consider voting no on H. Now, I know H gives the mayor and the other citywide elected officials an extra year in office, and you would think that the mayor would be advocating for it. But I want to be clear because, I strongly believe when I'm trying to bring forth the right decisions in city government, I do it for what's in the best interest of the city and not what's in my best interest personally. I'm really concerned about what this will do for our races. I mean, you think there's a lot of ballot measures on the ballot now, there will be a lot more. But not to mention, some of you are familiar with San Francisco's capital plan. And I know Supervisor Melgar is very familiar. This is a plan where as we retire old debt, we take on new debt, or we at least ask the voters, can we pay for dealing with the seawall along the waterfront? This is the capacity we have, we won't raise taxes. Can we beautify our parks? This is what we have available to do so. How do we fix our city assets, city hall, and all of those things? It's because of a capital plan. And this will completely derail that, create a number of challenges, and will be very much problematic for infrastructure, parks, and so many things that are important to the city. And so I, understand the intent of what it was trying to do, but because there wasn't really a public process and a discussion and an opportunity to look at data, this could eventually be very harmful to the needs of the city and for us to deliver for the city. And so I'm asking you to vote no on Proposition H. So I think that's all I came here for, right? Just to say what my priorities are. And just want to thank you all so much for your work, your advocacy. And, look, at the end of the day, elections, they'll have winners and they'll have losers. But I am hopeful that anyone who does not make it through this election would be willing to roll up their sleeves and continue to try and do work for the city, for the benefit of the city. We all live here. We all want to see good things happen in San Francisco. And it can't just be about a personality that you don't like. I will say, lastly, you would be proud that this last budget season, where Supervisor Ronan was the budget chair, we worked really well together. And I was really proud of that process and what we were able to accomplish for San Francisco. And I want us to be able to work like that every single time, and I'm sure the public does as well. So lots of work to do. We can get it done. Thank you for being strong Democrats and being involved in the process, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Our next guest, very ably, I'm sure.
Thanks, Jan. Good evening, everybody. Our next speaker also needs no introduction, especially in this room. But it's my pleasure to welcome Senator Scott Wiener to join us. He's been an amazing advocate for the Jewish community in the state legislature, currently the vice chair of the Jewish caucus. I was on Zoom watching an amazing press conference that he and our chair, Assemblymember Jesse Gabriel, were holding today. It's been a tough week, right? We've seen a rise in anti-Semitism on the far right and far left. I was down in LA by the 405 overpass, where we saw that awful stuff from the same people actually that are giving out the flyers. And at challenging times like these for our community, we need real leadership in our state legislature to represent our community with pride. And we have that in our own senator. So with that, I'm going to invite him up. Let's give him a hand. Senator Scott.
Hi, everyone. First, I'm so happy that my name's not on the ballot this year. You are, I have enormous respect. Running for office is not easy, and I know it is hard, and you get a lot of slings and arrows, but I really have enormous respect for anyone who wants to remain on the ballot and endure those slings and arrows, because public service is worth it. I want to also just say thank you to Wallenberg. This club is it's had some ups and downs over the years, and it is such an important voice within the Democratic Party. Even within our own party, there are times when things can get fairly ugly toward the Jewish community. We need to sometimes be introspective about some of the anti-Semitism with our own party. and Wallenberg is a key voice in making sure that the Democratic Party is accountable for fulfilling its core values. But of course, whatever happens in the Democratic Party pales in comparison to what's happening in the other party, the party that's actually opened up the Pandora's box of Nazis and white supremacists. And I don't even say, sometimes I feel like I'm being a drama queen by saying, but I'm not. The tragedy is that it's not even vaguely dramatic or exaggerating. It's like the actual reality. Back to Charlottesville with, the Jews will not replace us chants, and Donald Trump calling them good people, to right now, we have, as you just, Ty just mentioned with Kanye, literally getting up and saying he wants to start killing Jews. Yeah. This is after Tree of Life in Pittsburgh and after Poway and Holocaust survivors being gunned down while they were praying in synagogue. And then you have someone get up there, someone who has a platform saying, I want to kill Jews. And then, of course, people then unfurl that banner over the 405. And this is how things start. And so I have the honor, as Ty mentioned, serving as vice chair of our legislative Jewish caucus. We're now up to 14 Jewish members of the legislature. And our job is to protect and support our community. So whether it is working with our API caucus and other caucuses to make sure that we fund our nonprofit security grant programs so that community centers, synagogues, mosques, etc., can actually protect themselves from these violent attacks, or whether it is demanding that Adidas sever its ties with Kanye because said he wanted to kill a bunch of Jews, that's not acceptable, or whether it is making sure that we're supporting our Jewish college students, whether at UC Berkeley or at SF State, when they are experiencing atmospheres on campus that are completely hostile to Jewish students. We get involved and we have a responsibility, and allies are fantastic. That's true for all communities. Allies are awesome. Very few communities can do anything without allies. But we also have to have our own seat at the table, and we have to be there looking out for our own community. That's what we do with the Legislative Jewish Caucus. It's what Wallenberg does within the Democratic Party, and it's just a real honor to be here amongst so many amazing leaders. So Godspeed in the election, and have a great night.